Hi, good morning. We are here today to talk about your San Antonio short-term rental taxes and your monthly remittance of the hotel occupancy tax. And we're going to talk about some recent changes that have been made to the portal and your collection and filing requirements today. You can go to the next slide, Wendy. And as you can see, we have Wendy Walker, who is actually the project manager here. She's with Avenue. Wendy, I'll let you introduce yourself.
Hi, I'm Wendy Walker. I've been with Avenue for several years now, and I am the project manager on the San Antonio project. I've been working very closely with the city on these changes, and so I'm hoping that this webinar will answer all of the questions that you have about the changes today.
And as you can see, I'm not Matt Strand. I am Christy Cato. I'm standing in for him today, but I'm vice president here at Avenue, and I've been working with San Antonio for a couple of years now. And I'm pretty sure that if you've joined this call today, you're probably familiar with Avenue and the short-term rental projects that we have worked with them on. So if you go to the next slide. And if you're new to Avenue, I'll just give you a little bit of information of who we are. We are tax administrators. We partner with cities and counties and states all over the country to help them assist them with tax revenues related to short-term rental, things like that. As you can see, we have a pretty big footprint there. So many of you already know us. You're already filing on the platform, and you may be filing for other jurisdictions that we administer as well. But what we're going to talk to you today is specifically about the changes related to your rentals that are through the platforms like Airbnb, HomeAway, VRBO, and how you will report those taxes going forward, effective for February taxes that are due in March. And so with that, I'm going to turn it over to Wendy for the agenda. Throughout the presentation, I'm sure many of you are going to have questions. You can put your questions in the chat. We may answer some of them throughout the presentation if it makes sense. But Wendy, as she goes through the demonstration of the changes, a lot of your questions will be answered during the demonstration. And if we haven't gotten your questions answered throughout that, we will stop and we will answer your questions. And if it's something that we don't have the answer to, because obviously there might be something you asked we don't have the answer to, we will try to get that and we will circle back to you guys with the answer. So with that, Wendy, I'm turning it over to you.
Thank you, Christy. We are also joined today by Sabrina Garza. She is the works in the finance area there with the city. And so if we have questions that come up that need a response from the city, she is here to help us with that as well. So welcome to the presentation today. Anytime there are changes, the first question is always, why is this happening? So we're going to talk about that. And we're going to talk about whether or not it applies to you, because these changes do not apply to everyone who has a short-term rental property in the San Antonio area. And then we're going to take a specific look at the tax form and how it's changing for online filing. Several examples there. So we'll cover a lot of the questions that have been presented to us so far in that demonstration. And then we'll do some FAQs. We'll come back and hit the high points, talk about some of the questions that have already been asked. And then if there are any questions remaining from those that you're putting into the chat, we'll do a little Q&A session from that as well. With that, we'll go ahead and get into the why of what's happening. The city has enacted an ordinance that indicates that any platforms that provide short-term rental services that pay the state tax automatically will now be required to collect the local tax for the city of San Antonio and remit that directly to the city. This currently only applies to Airbnb and HomeAway. HomeAway is Vrbo. They purchased Vrbo. If you try to go to the HomeAway site today, you end up on the Vrbo site. So when we say HomeAway or Vrbo, we're using those terms interchangeably. So those two platforms began collecting San Antonio city tax at the beginning of February. So for rentals that were booked in February and are due, the taxes for those are due in March. So for taxes that are remitted, those taxes are remitted to the city by the platform with no details. So it's a lump sum payment to the city. The platforms are not providing us with property details. So while there will be a large tax payment made to the city, nothing that they provide us tells us that they paid your taxes. So that still requires, the ordinance still requires that you file your taxes on a monthly basis. None of the taxes are collecting county, none of the platforms are collecting county tax. That's very important. So that's the other reason that you are still required to file. It's really, really important for the city and for you as a property owner or operator to maintain correct filing histories for your property. And so your filing telling us that you had this many rentals or this dollar amount in rentals and this dollar amounts were handled by these two platforms, Airbnb and HomeAway or Vrbo. That's critical to ensure that we understand your compliance. It will help you avoid audits, and it also gives us the ability to provide accurate tax clearances. For example, if you were to sell your property, since we won't be able to reconcile back to the information that Airbnb and HomeAway provide us, your tax return will give us some reconciliation ability there. And that also helps ensure that we just have a level playing field across the lodging industry. So how does this apply to you? You've probably seen this graphic. The city has been quite communicative with the short-term rental community. And so you should have seen this via email already, but we want to talk about how the changes apply in each of these months and then going forward. So if we were in January, you're responsible for remitting your December taxes. If your platform remits the state hotel occupancy tax, we're going to call it HOT, for your December taxes, there's no change. They didn't collect it. And so you, as the property owner or operator, were responsible for collecting it and remitting it on the tax returns that you should have filed in January. Same thing for February. While this ordinance begins to apply in February, it applies to the lodgings booked in February, not the taxes reported in February. So in February, you're filing your January taxes. The platforms were not collecting or remitting those funds to the city. So you would still file just as normal with your complete total for your taxable revenues, and then the tax applied to that both for city and county. Then in March, so we're finally in March here, and February's taxes are due. In February, both Airbnb and Vrbo began collecting the city tax for the city of San Antonio and remitting it to the city. But you are still required to file your tax return and show the total amount that you rented. And then we're going to be providing you with a couple of deductions, one for Airbnb, one for HomeAway Vrbo. That will reduce the amount of your taxable revenue. And then you'll pay, if there's any difference, any balance remaining for properties that you rented, bookings that you rented perhaps through another platform, then you still owe city tax on those. And then you owe county tax on the entire amount. If your platform does not remit state HOT, if you're booking not on Airbnb, not on Vrbo, then there's really no change for you. You still report and pay 100% to the city and to the county, no matter what month it is. And you may fall into a third bucket. You may rent across multiple platforms where you have some rentals through Airbnb, some rentals through HomeAway Vrbo, and some rentals through other platforms or directly to you. If that's the case, we're going to show you how you file that as well. So now let's take a look at the actual form filing process. So first up, when you log into the system, this should look very familiar to you. There are no changes on this screen. The top half of this page refers to taxes, and the bottom half refers to permitting. We handle permitting for many cities, but we don't handle permitting for the city of San Antonio. So you don't have to click below here where it says short-term rentals. You're just going to come in, as you always have, click File a New Return, and that takes you into setting up your return. You're going to choose, just as you always have, no changes on this screen. You're going to select the state of Texas. Your current period that's due is February 2025. You'll select the return. That's the San Antonio short-term rental return, and the location that you're filing for. And then you'll click the Next button. This is the page where the changes have been made. Now, this screen, I know, looks a little bit busy, but we wanted to provide you with the text on the screen to tell you everything that I'm going to tell you verbally. The main change here is that these two lines, which we've labeled B and C, allow you to take deductions for rentals that were booked through Airbnb or HomeAway, which is Vrbo. So you're going to come in, it defaults to being a single filer for a single property. If you're inside the city limits, you choose that option. If you're outside the city limits, these changes don't apply to you. If the property is outside the city, none of this applies to you because, again, those platforms are not collecting county tax. No platforms are collecting county tax. And so you'll enter your deductions for receipts for Airbnb and then for HomeAway. And then the form will do the rest. It'll perform all the calculations for you. So we're going to take a look at a few examples of that. So in this first example, you had $10,000 of rentals through other platforms besides Airbnb or HomeAway. And so that's $10,000, no deductions. You'll leave those at zero. You owe for $10,000 of taxable receipts to the city and $10,000 of taxable receipts to the county, without a penalty or interest, which would not be calculated today. You would owe $900, that's 9% to the city, and $175, that's 1.75% to the county. We total that up for $1,075. So if you rent some of your rentals through Airbnb, then you would put that rental total, let's say $4,000, on line B. The system is going to calculate that, subtract out this deduction from the $10,000 to render $6,000 for the city. But notice the county amount stays the same at $10,000 because you owe the full amount to the county. So $6,000 at 9% is $540. For the county, again, that amount doesn't change, $175. Those two together are $715. And so that's the amount that you would pay. If you have bookings through both Airbnb and Vrbo, then you would put those amounts in here, $10,000 total of taxable receipts, $4,000 rented through Airbnb, $6,000 rented through HomeAway. And if you don't have any other rentals, then what you owe to the city is zero. But what you owe to the county is still this $175 because, again, you have to pay the county tax. And then moving forward, if you book across multiple platforms, let's say you had 4,000 rented through Airbnb and then 1,500 rented through Vrbo, then you have a balance that subtracts out $5,500 from this $10,000. For the city of San Antonio, you still owe tax on this $4,500. And again, the $175 to the county for a total of $580. We have some questions about.
Wendy, can we pause just for a second? We have several questions coming in, and they're good questions. And I wanted to go ahead and let us address some of these questions. So I saw the question about the system not being available right now. During the transitional period, you will not be able to file online until March the 10th. So you should return next week to submit your filing. Get it in before the due date. Wendy, there's another question here about they're asking, oh goodness, it was the question about where it was booked in November. So what happens when they booked in November? How will that work for February taxes? So I'm assuming Bridget Rodriguez, that if they prepaid the taxes and you've already been compensated, for the rental for that property in advance of someone actually staying there, you would still owe tax on that because Airbnb would not have collected that tax in November. So anything booked prior to February, you would still need to remit those taxes. So that would not be listed as a deduction. And on the next one, stays that go over the turn of a month, like February the 27th through March the 2nd, are those receipts all booked in the month we receive payment from the platform? It's when the activity happens. So just like you remit now, it wouldn't be any different from how you're remitting the returns. You're just going to take the deduction because the tax will have already been collected and paid by Airbnb. And Wendy is saying, just confirming, line A is the total receipts across all bookings. Is that correct, Wendy?
Yes, line A is your net taxable receipts. Now, I realize that there are some exemptions that apply across the state. For example, if you were renting to a U.S. government employee, um, for that reason, this number should not include that. Those exemptions are not listed out on this form separately, and so put in your net taxable receipts. So if the rental was exempt, you would not include it in this total.
Yeah. And we'll do one other thing. It says, how do we collect for state and county? Do we need to differentiate what is collected?
These two platforms collect for the state automatically, and they are remitting to the state. We do not administer for the state of Texas, so I'm not familiar with what your requirements are for reporting to the state. But those taxes are already collected by these two platforms. For your county tax, you are responsible for collecting that and then remitting it through this tax form for the total net taxable receipts.
Okay, so I just wanted to get some of those answered because there was a lot coming in and they were very similar questions. So now you can kind of move on, go forward with the demo.
Great. So once you have your values in here, and again, keep in mind, if you only rent through Airbnb, then you'll put your total amount there, and this amount for San Antonio will be zero. If you only rent through HomeAway, same thing, you'd put your total amount there, and this amount to San Antonio will be zero. You're not allowed to deduct more than your total net taxable receipts. So if you put $14,000 on this line, the form is going to stop you and not allow you to do that. These two numbers totaled together cannot exceed, B and C together, added together, cannot exceed the amount on line A because the amount due cannot be negative. Once you get your values in here, you're going to check this box at the bottom of the screen. This is a new checkbox for you. It's just acknowledging that you are required to retain your records for no less than 4 years. That applies to city and county records. The records that they're talking about here are what is referred to as a payout report that's available to you as the property owner or operator through the platform. And it outlines what your rentals were for a particular month and what amounts were paid by the renter and what taxes were collected and remitted by the platform. And so you have to retain those for 4 years. So anytime the city asks for those records, you have to provide them. And then once you've checked that box, you'll click the next button, and that will take you into the payment process, and you're already familiar with that. So we'll talk through a few FAQs at this point. The big takeaways are that these two platforms are collecting, if they collect Texas state tax, they now also, starting with bookings in February, have to collect the San Antonio city tax for February taxes due in March. The deductions don't apply to any prior periods. So if you're paying a back tax, let's say you were late paying your January taxes, there won't be deductions available on that form because these platforms were not collecting the tax in January. None of the platforms collect the county tax, and so you still have to report to pay your county tax on all your short-term rentals every month. County tax is included in the total that you pay at the bottom of the form, and that gets remitted properly so that the correct funds go to the city and the correct funds go to the county. The main change here on the form is that we're providing these two deductions fields to let you report the taxes that were paid through the platforms and remitted back to the city. Not all platforms are going to collect city taxes, so please don't assume that they are. Verify. You may want to double check if you already have custom rates set up in Airbnb or Vrbo. You want to double check with your platform to make sure that those are being properly remitted with this change. So keep that in mind if you're using those advanced features already. Tax on any rental on any other platform must be reported and paid by the property owner or operator. And so even if you advertise through Airbnb, Vrbo, and another platform, what matters is how was the property rented. Even though it's advertised on Airbnb, if it was rented through some other platform, not Airbnb and not Vrbo, you still have to remit the tax to the city and the county.
We have several questions, Wendy. So, I mean, they're coming in fast. So let's just kind of go through some of those. Some of these I'm looking at, we may not have answers to, but we can circle back or maybe update the FAQs document. So one of the questions, let's see. Let me go back to make sure I grab some of these. And so it says, Holly, she asked, do you happen to know where I can find a breakdown of the tax percentage for state, county, and city? And I'm assuming that's from the platforms. In a minute, Wendy's going to kind of show you an example of where you would find that. And I know that the platforms do have some reports that should include that information that you should have access to. Let's see. How do we collect for state and county taxes? Wendy, we do not, this is not pertain to the state taxes. You would need to kind of follow up with the platform in the state for that question. But for the county, Wendy, I'll hand that to you.
Okay. I've put on the screen an example for how things are broken down for the renter. So this is what it looks like to the renter when they rent on Airbnb or Vrbo. And so this is showing a taxable amount of $98 plus $99. And so so what's taxable on this rental, what's taxable is $197. That's 9% to the city, 6% to the state. These two are collected by Airbnb and remitted to the city and state respectively. But you are required to collect and remit the county tax. There are advanced features available in these platforms where you can say, here's an additional tax rate of 1.75 for the county so that you are collecting it from the renter. And then you have to put that amount on when you put in your taxable receipts on your tax form. it's going to tell you that you owe this amount of 1.75% to the county. Here's an example from Verbo. They allow you to kind of do a little pop down here, and they show you that they're on this rental, they're collecting accommodations tax, which is hotel occupancy tax, of $14.70 for the state and 22.05 for the city. Those are the correct percentages. The state is 6%. And so I just put this in a little Excel spreadsheet to verify those calculations. And I came up with the same results that they did. The amount that's taxable, again, is room rate of 160 and the cleaning fee of 85. This service fee of $25 here, the service fee for Airbnb of $27.81. Those are amounts that the platforms retain. Those are their fees, and they keep that money, and they owe tax on that money, but you do not. These funds, it's 197, that those funds are coming to you. On this rental, the taxable amount's 245. That amount is coming to you. But for the city and the state, the platforms have collected it and are remitting it. And so the additional amount that you owe, which will show up on your tax form when you fill in the numbers, is just the 1.75 to the county.
Yeah, and I have another question here, Wendy. It's from Becky. It says, before the state, you could opt out and pay it ourselves. Is that an option for City of San Antonio? No, that is not an option. So it will be collected. Airbnb, there is local legislation that requires them to collect and remit the tax if the rental is facilitated through their platform. So that would not be an option. Let's see. I bulk file. This is from Carlos. I bulk file. Will the format change for that?
There is a small change to the bulk filing format. There are very few people who use that feature, and so we didn't put it in this. We didn't put it in this presentation. But your file format, where you upload those returns, has a couple of extra columns to show your deductions for Airbnb and then your deductions for HomeAway. And so the filing format, when you go to the tax form, sir, you'll just want to download the new copy of the file format, and it just includes those two extra columns, and then all the calculations happen automatically on the form just the way they do now.
Okay. Another question is from Hector. It says, Airbnb is collecting the taxes. I was filing before. My last return was February. Do I stop filing? No, you do not stop filing. Airbnb has not been remitting and collecting taxes for San Antonio or Bexar County taxes up until this month, until February. So you do not stop filing. You will still need to file a return because, again, Airbnb and Verbo are not collecting the county tax at all. So those taxes are still due. And then also, if you're renting on another platform that's not collecting the tax, and a lot of people do, they may do individual renters directly, you would still need to report those taxes as well. And the next one is for Shelley. It says, Airbnb will allow you to add a custom tax that is collected from the guest and passed through to you. Yes. Yes, but now they're going to automatically collect the city taxes. Your special tax that you would still need to have in there would be the 1.75% for the county. So that money would come to you so that you would be able to remit that to the city on behalf of the county through this platform. So this Bexar County tax comes through this platform and is sent on to Bexar County. Michael LeBlanc, he says, how do we determine the deduction amount from each platform, Airbnb and VRBO? Wendy?
That's going to be on your payout report. And so you don't actually have to determine the amount of tax that they paid. You have to determine the amount of rentals through that platform. And so your payout report, I believe that's a common term for this report that's available to you as a property owner in Airbnb and the Verbo platforms. You have a payout report available to you where you can download it and retain it, or you look it up and total up those numbers for all of your rentals for February. and that's the value for Airbnb that you put on line B, and the corresponding value for on line C for Verbo.
Yep. I have a question from Jose. He says, how am I supposed to configure the Airbnb platform for county taxes if I'm forced to configure Airbnb taxes? It is automatic and the platform is not collecting it. So the platform should have been collecting for February taxes automatically, and I think this goes for the your special tax rate that you can add. Again, this is not related to the state. This is only for city and county. You would need to make sure the 1.75 is what you enter you configure that will come to you, so that when it comes time to remit, that you'll have that 1.75 to pay to San Antonio on behalf, to Bexar County. It goes through this platform. The next one is Edward. Is there still going to be a bulk uploader that includes the deduction options? I think we just covered that. Yes. I mean, there's been several questions about FAQs, and I may have said it, I may have forgotten. There will be an FAQs posted, and then we'll also forward out this presentation to all of the folks that attended it, and then we'll have a video as well. So you'll have support to help you through this month's filing. And it says from Tina, it says, is this webinar for hotel occupancy as well, or just Airbnb? I mean, this is hotel occupancy taxes that are when you are renting your property through the platform Airbnb and VRBO, they are now collecting the hotel occupancy taxes for city and county. I mean, for city, you would still need to remit the county.
It does not apply to if your facility is a hotel, then you are using a separate tax form, and these deductions don't apply. Because a hotel is not a short-term rental property.
Yeah. So there's another one, wish for our heroes to ask a question. Are the deductions we list on lines B and C the total revenues for that given month from Airbnb and VRBO, or the total or the tax amount they pay on our behalf? I think that answer, I think I know the answer, but I'll let you answer that.
Okay. It's the amount of the rentals. And so you had $10,000 in rentals, and $4,000 of those rentals came through Airbnb. That's what this example is showing you. You are not putting in the amount of tax that Airbnb paid. The system is deducting these two values to show the amount of receipts that you still owe tax on. So lines B and C are rental values, not tax values.
Yeah. I have another follow-up questions from Michael LeBlanc. He said, reposting this question, how do the owners determine the amount of the deductions to be applied to the total reported tax?
That will be on that payout report through your platform.
So again, the deductions are not the tax amount. So if you have rented $10,000 in property rent through Airbnb, and the tax was what I should know that round number, and the tax amount is added to it, you do not enter the tax amount collected in the deduction, just the rental amount.
These should be the amounts you receive from Airbnb when they pay you.
That's better, Wendy. Better answer. So I got a question from Annette. Are additional fees like a pool fee or pet fee also taxable? Cleaning fees as well?
Yes, they are. Everything that you collect from the renter, except for the fee that is retained by the platform, is a taxable amount. Let me run over to that example. So here, this rental was $98 for one night, a $99 cleaning fee, $27 went to Airbnb. That's not taxable. And then the taxes were $29.55. And so I added all of that up over here. 98 and 99 is $197. The city tax on 197 is $17.73. The state tax on 197 is $11.82. Those two numbers total to $29.55. which is what Airbnb showed as the taxes for this rental. Airbnb does not provide a little pop out that breaks down the values, at least not to the renter. Um, but Verbo does. There was a little pop down here where I could expand this tax, and it showed me these two lines of $14.70 and $22.05. So here was $160 for the rental, $85 for the cleaning fee. Those two values totaled to $245, and then tax on 245 for the city is 2205. That's 9% of 245, and that's the amount that Verbo charged. The state tax is 6%, and 6% of 245 is $14.70, which is what Verbo reflected for the state tax. The county tax is not included here. You still have to collect that and remit it. And some people do that by adding the special rate, the custom rate, to account for the county tax so that it's automatically calculated and collected by you on the platform. And then you are required to remit that to the county using the Avenue tax form. Other people, I cannot advise you on how to make this happen, but I'm aware that some people will just increase the rate of their room to account for this 1.75%, or just pay the 1.75% out of their own pocket, out of the amounts that you've already collected from the renter. How you handle that is your choice, but you are responsible for remitting the 1.75 to the county on the Avenue tax form.
Yeah. And so there's another question here from Carla. It says, so we can collect the February taxes until March the 10th. And when is the due date? No, February tax collection should have ended on February the 28th. So February taxes collected, or, that tax return still is due in March on the same timing and the same due date. There's no extension. There's no changes to those due dates.
Your February taxes are due by the end of March. The changes, we basically pulled out a week of time as a transitional period to make sure that all of the communications had gone out, that we were able to do these webinars so that people are aware of the changes that are being made on the website. If you go to hoteltaxonline.com right now today on March the 4th, you cannot file your February taxes. We have the tax form disabled temporarily to make sure that we had everyone pause and kind of absorb this information, give you time to learn where to get your information, where to get that payout report, and then you'll be able to begin filing your February taxes on March the 10th. And then they're due
but you
by...
have until Yeah. So
yes.
but you still don't have to file early. You can just start filing on the 10th. If you want to file early, you can. So Stone, he had a question. It says, if Airbnb did not collect the tax in February, do we file it, or does Airbnb? In some cases, it shows they collected. However, not in all cases. How do I show that difference on the filing form? Well, they should have collected it, but if for some reason they did not, you would just not include that in the deductions. Include those rentals would not be included in the deductions, and that tax would still be due.
Okay.
Jenny, it says, who will be verifying that the taxes are paid correctly? We'll process those returns, Avenue will, as they come into the system. And the review process is going to be no different than what it is today. And if you feel like you've overpaid, you can submit a refund request, and we'll review that and determine if there is reimbursement due and work on, processing a refund at that point.
It's really important, particularly on those last two questions, that you retain those records from Airbnb and Verbo, those payout reports, so that you can, if asked, you can prove that Airbnb collected it and remitted it, or that they didn't collect it and you did remit it. And so please be sure that you're keeping those reports available, and that your tax return reflects what that report says for the amounts rented through these two platforms. And again, if they did not collect the tax, they should have. If they did not, you are still responsible for paying the tax on those amounts.
There's a question from Estee, I guess, sad. It says, what? I guess she's confused. She said, I thought Airbnb will start filing my taxes now. You're saying Airbnb is not? I'm so confused. Correct. Airbnb is collecting and remitting taxes, for for the city of San Antonio. The reason that you still have to file a return is those county taxes that Airbnb is not collecting are still due to the county, and those need to be filed. In addition, not every person that owns property is 100% solely only renting that property through Airbnb or Verbo HomeAway. Many taxpayers rent them through other platforms. But regardless, you still have to file a return because that county tax, if you're doing 100%, you're not renting this property through any other platform except Airbnb or Verbo. Even at that point, you would still have to remit the county taxes. So a tax return is still due.
Airbnb and Verbo are not providing us any data related to you. They're not telling us who you are. They are providing a payment, a lump sum, single lump sum payment for the month of February. And for round numbers, let's just say that it's $1 million. They remit $1 million to the city of San Antonio, and they say, this is for lodging tax. There is no way for the city to know or for us to know, for Avenue to know, that $1 million included taxes for your property. Your tax return is what tells us that. If you don't file, you're going to look delinquent. You're going to be delinquent. Even though that $1 million may have included taxes for your property, there's no way for us to know it unless you file. If you don't file, you are delinquent for the city and you're delinquent for the county. So you do have to file. That's why we're making this change to the tax form so that you can account for all of that and still pay your county tax. And if we had a question on this screen, the last one, about long-term rentals. If someone books a 30-day or more stay at your property, you still have to file a zero return. Long-term rentals, 30 days or more, are not taxable for HOT. And so, but you still have to file. And so you would file a zero return in that case. And if you don't file that return timely, there are penalties still applied to that. So if you didn't have any rentals in February, or if all of your rentals for that property, if it was a long-term rental, and that even includes a long-term lease. Let's say that you've listed your property and someone comes in and says, hey, I'm going to be in San Antonio for 6 months. I want to rent this property for 6 months. I'm going to lease it. Your permit is good for, I believe, 3 years. You still have to file every month, file a zero return every month. And again, you want to file it timely by the end of the following month to ensure that there aren't penalties applied to that zero filing. So you have to do that in order to keep your compliance accurate. Otherwise, your account is going to be marked as delinquent, and the city can revoke your permit for delinquent taxes. If you owe a zero return and you don't file it, then that return is still considered delinquent, even though there was no money attached to it.
Yeah, but in theory, they should never have a zero return unless you just had zero rentals for that month, because you would still need to be remitting the county tax as well. There's a couple other questions. I saw a question about a support number. Yes, the support number is the same. Also, the ticketing system, you can go through a web portal and enter a ticket, and an agent will respond with assistance as well. So we'll provide that toll-free number, but that number is not changed, and support will be provided Monday through Friday, just normal business hours, 8 a.m. to 5 p.m. There was another question here about, it says, to be clear, so for the deductions on Airbnb, total revenue should not include the Airbnb service fee based on your slide sample. No, it should be included. Yes.
Not the service fee, not the Airbnb fee. that should not be included. The fee that Airbnb charges for using their portal should not be included in your taxable revenue.
Yeah.
Or same thing with Verbo. Those amounts are not sent to you. This Airbnb service fee, this Verbo service fee, those are not taxable for you. These funds are retained by the platform. They are not remitted to you, and you do not owe tax on those amounts. But all of the other amounts included in your rental, if you have, um, someone mentioned a pool fee. If you had a pool fee, that is taxable at the hot rate of 7%. I'm sorry, 9% to the city and 1.75% to the county.
Yeah, someone asked if this is transient occupancy tax. This is hotel occupancy tax, but a lot of states and cities, it really does mean the same thing. But in San Antonio, this tax is referred to as the hotel occupancy taxes.
In some places, it's also called lodging tax, and so you'll hear those terms. They are interchangeable terms.
And yes, and it says, so from the examples, technically from the examples, the total revenue from Airbnb or Verbo is a taxable amount. That's correct.
Correct.
Somebody says, but when we file, we have to add a payment. Are you getting double payment? No, we are not getting double payment because remember, Airbnb and Verbo are not collecting the county taxes. And if you made any rentals outside of the platform of Airbnb and Verbo, you still must collect and remit those taxes on the same return. And it says the next question is, when Airbnb collects state taxes, do they just pay a lump sum to the state? We don't know. That's between Airbnb and Verbo. You could contact the state and maybe ask that question, or you can ask Airbnb. So I think we answered this question earlier. From CMAID, it says some guests booked before February but arrived in February. I need to pay the city tax myself. Other guests in February booked in February and arrived in February. Airbnb collected the tax and the city tax. How do I handle that? Well, you'll still, if an Airbnb collected it on those days, that would be a deduction. That would be in your deduction field. So you wouldn't be paying taxes on it again. If it was booked before February and the tax was not collected, then you would not put that in the deduction field, and those taxes would be due. So I think we've gotten through most of the questions. I know some of them were kind of in the same vein. Wendy, I don't know if you have any other slides to complete, but we will post FAQs and we will release this presentation for people to review. And of course, we'll have support to help you answer calls as you go forward. We understand it's a little confusing, but overall, I think once you do this month and next month, I think it will be just easy for you to understand once you go through the process one time.
And so I looked through our FAQs that we had from our webinar that we did last Friday. Same basic content, but I went ahead and pulled the questions from that session and updated this slide. With those, we have covered all of those topics in our discussion, either through things that we already talked about or from questions from this group of people. And so I want to just put up our support information. You can contact Avenue Support Line at 888-885-SATX. That number has not changed. Thank you all so much for participating today. It's encouraging to see the response from the community, and we just want you to know that we are here to support you. Again, these changes are going to go into effect on the website on March the 10th. That's next Monday. If you have any questions, you're welcome to give us a call.